Okay, so the next step for our micro layout is we need to talk scenery, because let's face it, this is not very realistic. Okay, so we've set the other module aside for the sake of simplicity in viewing, and we can dedicate our focus just to this unscenic module. So to create basic landforms for the layout, what I'm going to be using is pieces of scrap dollar store sheet foam that I have. This is the stuff that you can pick up for literally $1 at most 99-cent only stores or Dollar Trees. It's that Adams foam board. Also works really good for making model airplanes and stuff. Or if you don't have access to that, I am using these IKEA cork placemats. I'll have a link to those in the description. You can get 4 of them for like $5, and it's actually a very cheap way of getting your hands on some very nice sheet cork, if you asked me. Also, you're going to need an adhesive, and in this case I'm just using good old Elmer's white glue, like the crafter's choice for everything. So the basic thing that we're going to do here is in this middle area in here, I've decided that we're going to build up a little bit of a hill just to kind of hide the transition into the building. It's going to be right here. More or less the concept is I just don't want to make it super obvious that there's nothing, boom, there's a building. I want to add a little bit of visual interest, a little bit of depth, that sort of thing. Make it a little more interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our lovely sheet cork here, and we're just going to loosely lay it out here. And I actually want the fit to be somewhat tight between the tracks. So if it's not perfect, I can always trim it up. So as you can see, we've cut our piece of cork and it fits perfectly. As right about here, we're going to have the building flat that is going to hide this siding. So now what we can do is just brush off any junk on the surface that we don't want there and apply our white glue. Perfect. Just kind of slide it around, make sure everything gets covered nicely, and that looks good to me. So now what we can do is we can put down a couple more layers of cork to kind of randomly build it up. And I know what you're going to be thinking is, oh my gosh, there's going to be steps left behind. I totally understand that. We'll get to that in a minute. There's actually some different ways that you can work around it. We're going to take one of our rail cars here and just make sure that there's not going to be any crazy obvious issues with clearances. Looks good to me. So now we can glue the top layers down and wait for the glue to dry. One other thing, make sure that you've got some heavy stuff to set on top, as it helps make sure that if there is going to be any warping, it's taken care of. Okay, so the glue's had some time to set, and as you can see, we have our basic landform in there. Now, there's a couple of options when it comes to actually creating texture for the scenery. In this case, I've decided the fastest route is just to use some lightweight spackling compound, which is, in my opinion, for tiny layouts, a very nice option versus, say, plaster of Paris or hydrocal, as 1, it tends to stay in place better, and 2, it is pre-mixed, and 3, also the stuff that I'm using tends to be a little more, shall we say, flexible when it's dry, so it's less likely to crack and things like that. So in this case, I'm just going to spoon it on a little bit like frosting. And I will admit it is a little bit tricky to get it to stick at first. So what I like to do is just gently, somewhat press it in there with my thumb, just to get it to begin to stick, and then let it sit for a minute, and then it tends to be good. Okay, so I got that done, and as you can see, we have some spackle on there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to let it sit for a while so that way it can actually adhere decently. And then we're going to come along with a little bit of acrylic paint, and we're just going to paint it over so that way it's not white should the spackle get chipped for whatever reason. Obviously, white is kind of ugly and not very realistic. So in the meantime, if you're wondering what's going to happen here, there's going to be a building flat that's going to go there that's going to hide this. This right here just kind of helps hide the transition, if you will, which isn't a bad thing. And then I'm not sure what's going to go here, but we'll figure that out as time goes on. This one's being done more or less in pieces, just for the sake of video. So I'm going to let this sit for a bit, go work on some other stuff, and then come back. So now what we can do is come along with a little bit of paint. In this case, I'm just using some brown acrylic. We can carefully brush it on to here to form a base for our ground cover, which is this stuff, just some fine ballast and some green blended turf. Helps give it some traction so it has something to stick onto. And then we can also come along and start to do some of the ballasting for the rest of the layout. So let's get started. Okay, now that we have that on there, we can come along and start applying a minimal amount of ballast material, which will be simulating our dirt. And by minimal, I'm talking we're not putting a whole lot on here. We're just trying to lightly cover this without, you know, losing all of our clearances or things like that. I would say that's probably good, so let me snap a photo so you can see. Okay, now we're on to the really important part, bonding the scenery down. Now you have multiple choices for materials here. You can use watered down white glue, watered down matte medium, or there's a lot of scenic glues out there that claim they'll do the same thing. Really, it's a case of what's convenient for you. In my case, I'm just using some old matte medium that I got a long time ago. It's been thinned down with about 50-50 water, but to make sure that everything flows properly, we're going to first apply a little bit of soapy water to the surface, so that way when we apply the matte medium, it breaks the surface tension and it doesn't glob up in one spot, which is not a good thing. For the soapy water, you really only need about a drop of dishwashing detergent, dishwashing soap, to 1 cup full of water. It really makes a difference. Although I still recommend gently dripping the water on to allow for it to soak in there without puddling up and making a nasty surface. The other option is you can use a spray bottle whatever's more convenient. Okay, I'm gonna say that's probably got enough, maybe almost a little too much in spots, but see for yourself. Like I said, sometimes it puddles up a little bit in spots, but it tends to just float in there eventually. So I'm not horribly worried, as this stuff is pretty thick and this is a portable layout, so clearly I want things stuck on here good. If there are a few spots that you are worried about, you can take your soapy water mixture and just gently dribble it on top to help thin it down, and that should help do the trick. Now for the last step, you can sprinkle on our blended turf. For this, for better control, I like using a spoon over the package. The package tends to spray it everywhere. If I get blended turf areas I don't want it doesn't really matter, because those are going to be covered with ballast, and we're going to cover that in a later episode with ballasting track, but we're just focusing on the basic scenery stuff right now. And I like that. So I'm going to call that there. I'm going to see how well the matte medium soaks in. If later in the day I feel like it needs a little more, I'm going to come along with the soapy water and a little bit of matte medium just to make sure everything is bonded in there really well, because this is a portable layout. Clearly I don't want things flaking off on me. That wouldn't be good. So I'm going to go clean my brush and let this sit for a bit, and I'll see you guys here later on Make It with Calvin.